thank you for coming, and I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful night. Mary's story is amazing.
Good evening. It's great to be here. Tori and Truro have been, from the beginning, a source of healing and wholeness for this young man who turned 59 on Monday. And it is wonderful to be here. Is this called the Undercroft, I think? Anyway, it's also dedicated to the glory of God and on the back plaque. And that's something that has always brought me very close here. I've had a chance to also have a presentation in the old Civil War house on the same property here, which was pretty amazing. But tonight, I'm here to introduce our speaker tonight. And I just jotted down a few lines because I really don't have anything to say about her. I do, however, have a few things to say about her daughter. Courtney would have been 27 on August 18th. And just coming into your church tonight, I went into the sanctuary and I pulled out one of your Bibles, and Ecclesiastes 12 popped up. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men are bent and the grinders cease because they are few. Those who look through the windows are dimmed and the doors on the street are shut, when the sound of the grinding is low and all the daughters of song are brought low. The end of the matter all have been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of us, the family of God. That's what Courtney taught my wife and I. Life is an adventure. Life is an adventure. Even though this wonderful young lady couldn't quite form words, or, she sang in her own way, she couldn't really walk too well, if at all. Her eyes, her heart, the great writers of the faith talk about communicating heart to heart. Watching this young lady suffer and die and live is really tough. Grief and love, there's a fine line. But knowing we will hold each other one day in paradise, that's only known by the grace of God alone. And that's what Courtney taught my wife and I. When we talk about at Tepeyac that we want to see the face of Christ in all our patients, Courtney taught us that. Touching her was touching the body of Christ. But it really wasn't I wasn't helping her. That sassy little firecracker. That was a very tender word from her, the woman who's speaking tonight. But my wife said the same thing. Without speaking, she told you everything. Without walking, she told you that you were on a pilgrimage to the beloved kingdom of God. And her eyes and her heart taught us how beloved I was from the Father. She not only brought people to the cross, but she brought people to her house to sing Christmas carols. I was over their home, and people would show up singing Christmas carols in the front yard. So, Miss Courtney turned to her mother and her father for everything. We must do the same. Courtney is calling to us. She is speaking to us, not only through that book, but through the conversation with her dad and the talk tonight from her mom. She turned to them for everything. I had the gift of being present when she died and she passed. I pronounced her. I was her doctor. No. She was my friend. She taught my wife and I many, many lessons over the years. And that's what I think we're going to learn tonight from, that's right, Mary Lenaburg, who's coming up here to speak. Courtney was her sunshine. Courtney helped us, and even tonight as we struggle with our own issues in our own families, never to quit, because the grace of God is bigger and better and more joyful, even in the midst of tough times. So with that introduction, I really want to introduce you Courtney's mom. Oh, that's right, Mary Lenaburg.
I'm already crying. That's not fair. Wow. Okay. Hi. I'm so glad you're here. Okay. I'm Courtney's mom. It's been a while since I've heard that. Okay. So tonight we're going to talk about the beautiful gift of life and how even the worst things that you think that could possibly happen turn out to be the very best things that you never thought you needed to happen. So I'm just going to tell a story. That's what I'm going to do. And I warn you now, you will hopefully laugh, I hope. I know you're going to cry. And if you don't, then I want to know how you don't afterwards. You can tell me your secrets, because I was already crying over there. So, but I always like to tell everybody that, because afterwards, when I don't warn you, I usually have a line of people saying, you should have told us, we could have come prepared. So that is your warning. You have now been warned. Okay, so Courtney Elizabeth Lenaburg entered the world on August 18th, 1992. And she came fast and furiously, 5 hours of an unmedicated birth in Brunswick, Maine. She was our second child, our fourth pregnancy. We had two, one before her older brother, Jonathan, who went home to the Lord. We never got to hold him. And then one in between the two children. And her brother was almost three when she was born. And everything was fine. It was great. I grew up in a large family with 6 brothers and a sister. So to have a girl was awesome. I was like, we can buy pink things. And my husband, I remember he went on deployment. He was in the Navy at the time. He was a P3, a naval flight officer. And he came home from deployment, and I was pregnant with Courtney. And everything was pink. And it was very shocking to him, because when he left, it was blue. And he came home and it was all pink. And he was like, what's happening? And I said, we're having a girl. And he goes, is this what the rest of our life is going to look like? Like pink? And I said, if I have anything to say about it, yes. So she came into the world beautifully and peacefully. And I think that was God's gift to me. Because when I think of her birth, there is no trauma around her birth. I did not have to decide anything. It was just a gift. She was pure gift. And then when the day of her baptism was 5 weeks later, we were home here in the Archdiocese of Washington. I grew up in Rockville, Maryland, right over the river. And my brother was getting married. My younger brother was getting married. And so in a large Catholic family, if you are one of them, when one sacrament happens, you tap everybody else. What else needs to be done? We're all in the same place, right? So Joe got married on a Saturday. Courtney was baptized on the Sunday. See how that works? Everybody's there. We do it all together. And so as I was holding our daughter, our son was running around the baptismal font, as 3-year-olds will do. And all I kept wondering was, please just don't trip up the priest as he's, administering the sacrament. Let's make this licit. So, the water's got to hit the head. So let's make that happen. And I was holding her over the baptismal fount, and she arched her back and curled her hands in, made a guttural sound and a shake, and then started crying. at the time of her actual baptism. And so I thought, oh, it's cold water. It's cold water. I calmed her down. I held her to me. Father continued with the rite. We completed the baptism, and toward the end of the baptism, she went into another, what we came to understand were a grand mal seizure. And my father was standing next to me, and my dad was undergoing his first round of chemotherapy. He had just been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which he got from being exposed to Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. And so he was in the midst of a great battle himself, and he had seen people have seizures, and he knew right away. He said, she's having a seizure. We have to go to the hospital now. And so I was trying to calm her, and so I started to nurse her, and she went into another seizure while I was nursing her. And that's how we arrived at the hospital. So Drama was her middle name. We should have named her that, Courtney Elizabeth Drama Lenaburg. And as we came into Bethesda Naval Hospital, which is now Walter Reed National Medical Center, we walked into the ER. We kind of created a little bit of a commotion. The 3-year-old was crying. My husband was panicked. My parents were there. Courtney, I was holding myself in a way that she could breathe, but she was still actively seizing. And so, praise be to God, our guardian angels had gone ahead of us and prepared the way. And so the captain who was running the ER that night saw us coming through the ER, the great, I call them the wall of death and destruction is what an ER was always to me, like the wall opens and you walk through it. And he saw us, and he had been signing papers at the desk. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was getting ready to switch shifts with the next one to come in, but God placed him in our path for a reason, and that was to save our daughter's life. And he immediately approached me, and all I can remember about that moment is that he looked exactly like Tom Selleck. He's really handsome. And that's what I remember. Courtney's having a seizure, and Tom Selleck is walking toward me. And I'm, slightly exposed, so that's not a moment you want Tom Selleck to see you in. And I just was kind of like, gosh, this isn't good. I don't think this is a good situation. And I remember looking at Jerry, and Jerry's looking at me like, what do I do? And I'm looking at Tom Selleck, and he's walking toward me. And I remember him standing in front of me. I don't remember his name. It's Captain somebody. I remember the four bars, and he goes, hi, Mom. And I said, hi. And Courtney's, actively seizing. There are now corpsmen next to him. There's a nurse. People are gathering. And he was just so calm. And he's like, I want you to tell me exactly what's happening right now. And I just, she was being baptized. She was still in her white baptismal gown, and she started shaking. So I tried to nurse her, and now this is happening, and I don't know what's happening and what's happening. And he said, okay, this is what's going to happen. She's having a seizure. I'm going to have the nurse, she's going to give her a shot right in her heel, and then she's going to relax, okay? And then I'm going to take her, and this nurse right here, lovely woman standing next to him, she's going to help you. And I said, okay. And my dad was right behind me. And what I didn't know then was my father was already taking a posture with his hands out because he thought I was going to collapse. And praise God that he did, because I did collapse. And he knew that. He knew his daughter well, that once the immediate emergent moment was over, I was done for. And so they gave her the shot. She relaxed. She detached herself from me. The doctor took her. I fell to the ground. Chaos ensued. I didn't see her again for 3 hours. She was back being worked on. She had IVs everywhere. She continued to have seizures. It was the first time I ever met an admiral. Admiral Morales walked in. She was the head of the pediatric unit there at the entire Bethesda Naval Hospital. They called her in. And she was a fiery Puerto Rican. So half of what she was saying I couldn't understand because it was half Spanish, half English, and people were moving though. I mean, like there was movement happening. And so you knew that just sit down and be quiet and she was gonna take care of it. And I just kept looking at Jerry, and I had ice packs on me, and my parents at some point took Jonathan with them, and they left. I don't remember when that was. And Jerry and I just looked at each other, and I said, she's gonna die. We're going to lose her. That can't be. That just can't be. And we had made mistakes. We had come together with wounds from our childhood. We had entered into this marriage with a lot of hope and very little brains. And we were young. I was 25. He was almost 28. And we'd already been married, 4 years. And we were still figuring it all out. And this was just something totally unexpected. Didn't know what to do. And so they finally let us go back. And the reason why I always start with this story is because this is the moment of the first change, the first understanding that life as we knew it was never going to be the same. I remember walking into that room, and there were machines everywhere. She had like 3 IVs in her, and she just was so tiny in this big bed. And the physician who was, the neurologist on call, Admiral Morales was standing there, and she was like, you tell them what's going on. This is a teaching hospital, right? So he said, well, she's having grand mal seizures, but we don't know why. She doesn't, we did a spinal tap. We're waiting for that to come back. We did all this blood work. Basically it was a big question of why, but we're going to send her down to get a CAT scan. Because this is what we're thinking. We're thinking there's either a brain anomaly that was not caught when she was in utero, or she has a brain tumor. And either one of those things will have catastrophic results. Now, I am not the smartest woman in this room, but I know what catastrophic results means. And so I looked at Jerry, and Jerry, being the Navy man he stood next to me and kind of gained 3 more inches and said, okay, what is required here? What do we need to do? Give us the list and we will do it. What is the plan? And I said, well, we're going to admit her to the hospital, and then we're going to start running all the tests. Now, because it was Courtney, Drama being her middle name, we were supposed to drive back to Maine the next day because we were moving. We were going to meet the moving truck who was going to pack our things, and we were moving actually back to DC, where Jerry's next duty station was going to start. But you can't stop a military move. That's just not something that the military does. Whether you're there or not, they're going to move you. So I went to the hospital. I was in the hospital in the intensive care unit with Courtney in the PICU, the pediatric intensive care unit, and Jerry had to say goodbye to his daughter and drive back to Maine so he could move us. So here we are. We have no idea if she's going to live through the night. We have no idea what the catastrophic results are. And he had to say goodbye. It is a moment that I don't visit very often. We talk about it a little bit more now, but it was truly hell. There's no other way to. It was a hellish moment. And by the grace of God, this strong Navy man was able to compartmentalize his feelings. Praise God for that. I don't do it so well. He does it really well. And get in a car and drive 12 hours so that he could forget to empty the trash can before it was moved and not clean out the refrigerator. So that when it showed up in 3 weeks, that led to a really good conversation on what we do in a PCS move. But I can see how he would have forgotten that. He was a little stressed out. 3 o'clock that morning, I find myself in a room filled with orange chairs. It's the CAT scan room in the basement of that hospital. And it's 3 a.m., and they finally have an opening in the CAT scan, and they bring down this crib that, Courtney's this little teeny tiny thing in the middle of this big bed. And they put her in the CAT scan room. And that's when I started my conversation with the Lord. And it sounded a little like this. What the bleep do you think you're doing? That was out loud at the top of my lungs in the basement of a military hospital. What do you think you're doing? How dare you even come at this little girl? You come at me all you want. This is when my 6 brothers, my own football helmet when I was 8, this is when that girl showed up. And she was standing there face to face with the Lord God saying, you're not going to take her. You think you're going to take her? You have another thing coming. Like you can really negotiate with God. By the way, you can't, just so you know. But I remember my father, he came, I just heard his voice. And he used to encourage us to pray on our knees. And when my dad was really in a season of great prayer, great searching, you would find him in his bedroom. The crucifix was on the wall, and he'd have his hands up, adorantum, on his knees. Because what happens to your body when your hands are up is that you have no center, you have nothing to hold on to, so you really have to pull everything in, the glutes are in, everything's in, and you're just solid, right? But it's a full surrender. You have no control. Somebody could come in and sweep you off, right? And so I remember him saying, when it gets bad, Mary Beth, just lift your hands up. And so I knelt down on a hospital floor, and I put my hands up. And I cried out to the Lord to not take her. Please don't take her. Please don't take her. I'll do whatever you want. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't take her. And in the voice of my father, who I understood my dad's big Irish booming voice, I recognized that one. So God used his voice that night. He asked me a question. He said, do you love her? And I'm like, you're an idiot. What kind of question is that? Literally, that's what I said. I'm like, you're an idiot. Of course I love her. She's my daughter. And he said, well, I love her too. And I don't make mistakes. All right. Omnipotent, omniscient, all-loving, all-knowing God. You say that you love her. You say that you love me. You better fix it. And that's pretty much how we ended that conversation. You better fix it. But Courtney came out of the CAT scan room, and there was no brain tumor. There was no brain anomaly. As a matter of fact, it was perfectly normal. They could find nothing wrong. After a week in the pediatric intensive care unit, there was nothing wrong with this child, but she had seizures. And so we went home to our new apartment, and she was given phenobarbital, which is just a basic, seizure medication that's pretty safe. That is the first one that they tend to start with all of these sorts of things. And we began a life with a child who was developmentally moving along, but had seizures until she was 7 months old. And tonight I'm going to hit on all of these beats of how we had to show up and fight for her life. How we even then had to speak life into a medical community that didn't know what it meant. They understood medicine. They didn't understand that God is bigger than medicine and that miracles happen even if healing doesn't happen. That God is present in all things. And so when she was 7 months old, they thought she had something called West syndrome. And it shows up in a very specific way on an EEG. And so they were very excited. Everybody got excited. Like, we figured it out. This is it. We have a medication for this. We have a treatment plan for this. This is awesome. But it's a little iffy, It's never a good thing when the doctors say it's a little iffy. If that ever happens in your life, just the answer is no, thank you. And when it's not so iffy, come back to me. However, when you're desperate to fix something, and you have not surrendered it to the Lord, you're still in that battle, you think iffy sounds pretty good. And so we did our research. We talked to families that had tried the medication and had had great success. We talked to families that had tried the medication and had no success, but no damage to their child either. So it either stopped the seizures or it didn't. We were given this huge binder. This is pre-WebMD. Thank you, Jesus, because I would have driven myself nuts with that. But, 1992, so you're given this binder of studies. And you're like, you want me to read this? I can't even spell that word. I had a dictionary. My dad bought me a medical dictionary. And that's how I spent the next week researching what all of this was. And so after that week, for the first time since the conversation, in the CAT scan room, the Lord and I had another big sort of meeting of the minds. And I said, okay, you've given us this opportunity. I'm going to give it to you. You think we should do this? Then I want signs. I want neon signs. I want balloon animals. I want somebody to walk in and say, Mary, you should give this child this medication because X, Y, and Z. And then I'm going to know it's from you. And I'll be down, except for the balloon animals. Everything else happened. And so we felt like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to give her this medication. And it's going to solve all the problems, right? Because that makes sense. And so we did. Now, we did all the pre-testing. She wasn't allergic to anything. She came through it beautifully. The doctors were all on board. We're ready to go. And I had to learn how to give her a shot in her thigh, which, you know, she's a 7-month-old chubby little thing, and not a pleasant experience, but I did it. And on day 3, everything went sideways. Her brain swelled. Her body went septic. She lost consciousness and had to be taken immediately to the PICU. She barely survived. And what we came to understand is Courtney's allergic to steroids. And you can't tell that unless you have a massive amount of steroids in your body, which on day 3, she met her massive amount. So for the remainder of her life, we could not give her steroid. That's a complicated situation because steroids are what we give for inflammation of all kinds of things. So we were in the hospital and everything was lost. She lost her sight. We have a photograph taken about 6 hours before anything bad happened, and we know it was the last time she saw us for the remainder of her life. She lost all development. She was hanging out at about 7 to 8 months in development. She went back to infancy, lost it all. She remembered how to hold her bottle, and I think it was basic survival brainstem patterning, and that was it. And she blew up. She looked like a little Michelin baby, was in pain, crying all the time. And that's who we brought home. We brought home a different child than who we took to the hospital. And on that day, we figured out that sometimes even when you do all the right things, bad things still happen. Because we live in a world where sin exists. But we also live in a world where God's love overwhelms and overcomes. But it was going to take us a few years to figure that out. And so when she was 9 months old, we ended up at Johns Hopkins, the best of the best. We were in their pediatric research unit, which, oh, by the way, is not covered by insurance. And in 1992, that was $15,000 that was not covered by the Navy. Yeah, that was fun. That took us a few years to retire. But after that week, they did every test that was available to the medical community at that time. Every test. Muscle biopsies, spinal taps, MRIs. They did nuclear medicine where everybody in the room came in this green, like Martian suit, holding a lead case with stuff in it. And I'm sitting there like, hey, let's go to the beach. And Courtney's completely unprotected, but they're all walking in with the green suits. And all I keep thinking is, do I get a green suit? Does she get a green suit? And what are you getting ready to put in her body? But it was a PET scan, and that's how they saw the blood movement in the brain to see if there were any blockages. There weren't. We both glowed for a few days after that in the dark, but she was fine. And so at the end of that week, what we were told was it wasn't the seizures that were harming Courtney. It was the brain damage from the medication we gave her. We did that to her. That's what we felt. We almost killed our kid. That's a lot. It's a lot. But we didn't have time to think about it because she needed us. She couldn't do anything without us, as John said. Nothing without us for the remainder of her life. I remember a moment where an entire team comes in. Now, when an entire team of medical professionals comes into your room at the hospital, FYI, one of two things are happening. Number one, you just won the lottery and a miracle has happened and they've all come to shake your hand. Number two, they are about ready to destroy your life forever. We got number two. She would never see. She was never going to speak. She would never walk. She could never care for herself. She would probably be incontinent her whole life. Her back had scoliosis. It was already developing at the age of 9 months. It ended up looking like an upside down question mark. She would need assistance. She would never live alone. And it went on and on. And then they told us that Jerry and I needed to enter marriage counseling because 80%, it is now up to 83%, of all marriages with a disabled child end in divorce. 80%. We weren't getting divorced. We just had a disabled child. Why do we need that? We would come to need it. Then they told us to get Jonathan, her 3-year-old brother, 4-year-old, he just turned 4-year-old brother, into therapy because something like 20%, 22% of siblings of special needs kids end up as alcoholics, drug addicts, and some even take their own life because the parents are so busy trying to save one life that another is set aside, and they bear that burden. And I remember they left, and I signed the paper that said we were going home. So I'm in the room, I'm holding Courtney. Jerry was not with me at the time, and I'm rocking her, and she's sound asleep, and she just is so beautiful. She had no hair till she was 3, bald as a billiard ball, just this beautiful butterball of a baby. And I just started weeping. And Jerry came into the room at that moment, and he's like, what happened? What did I miss? You were fine 5 minutes ago. What's going on? And I told him everything. And that day, the warrior that I knew existed in my husband showed up on the battlefield. And I remember him kneeling down next to me, and he said, "You never leave a man behind. She is wounded on the field of battle. We will not leave her there. We will do whatever is necessary, whatever costs us, whatever we have to lose, we will do it because this is our daughter and she is worth fighting for." Okay, battle plan drawn. And then we took her home. And for the next 7 years, we lived. Not well, not very healthfully. Courtney was like an earthquake in our life. All the wounds that we existed within Jerry and myself, that we brought into our marriage, the woundedness that exists in all of us, came rushing to the surface. I discovered Jerry had an addiction to pornography. I had an addiction to food. And when you have a rupture in what is keeping all of that at bay, there is nothing to stop the torrent of evil that was unleashed in our house. And so I took it out on myself with food, and he removed himself emotionally from the family. It was a nightmare. And we had a little boy who was just lost in the midst of all of it. I remember Jonathan was 4. He was kicked out of preschool for biting. He was so angry all the time. He didn't know what to do. All Mom and Dad did was argue. All Courtney did was seize and stop breathing. And Jonathan was left to just watch it all. And so our family kind of imploded. Now, we still went to Mass because my mother is a good German Catholic, and that guilt runs deep. And we also attended the same parish as my parents, so heaven forbid I wasn't going to get that phone call on top of everything else. So people were amazed when I wrote this book, and they were like, "All of that was happening?" And I said, "Yes. But why didn't you tell us?" I'm like, "Which part would you like me to share? My food addiction, Jerry's pornography addiction, Jonathan getting kicked out of preschool," because that would have made us the fun ones at the party. You know, there was no place to share it. There was no place to go. And it was a group of women at our parish that asked me to join a Bible study. And I said, no, I'm Catholic. We don't do that. We don't do that. And they're like, well, we're Catholic too, and we're just going to do this. And I said, fine, I'll go. And I started participating in this Bible study, and I would bring Courtney and Jonathan with me. And they never said anything. They welcomed her. They held her. She had seizures. They were patient. Nobody freaked out. It was the first place I felt like it was going to be okay. And it was the rebels in my parish. And I thought, okay, I guess I'm joining the rebel group over there. And they saved my life. They saved my life. They saved my marriage. At that point, Jerry and I came to a place where I had actually entered into that addiction with him because I thought if I didn't, he would leave. And I had no means to care for our children. Courtney, I couldn't earn enough to afford her care. And I was desperate, and so I did. And I was in that hell with him for 5 years. And I remember the night where I made a decision for my own soul, even if it meant the destruction of our family. And I told him I couldn't do it anymore. And I said, you have to choose us, or you have to pack your bags and go. And again, the man that I knew existed showed up. And he said, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I choose you. And I choose this family. And the next day, he got a mentor. There was no program to go to. There was nobody to talk. Nobody talked about this. This is just what men do behind the doors. No other married couple was talking about this. There was no place to go. Our priest was like, what? You want to talk about what? And now it's an epidemic in our society, but back then it was just not something you talked about. So praise God, he provided, as God does. And we began this very slow journey back to one another and back to wholeness as a family. And then God sent us across the sea to Lourdes. And I don't want to give away everything because I'd really like you to read the book. But we had an experience in Lourdes where we watched our daughter, in the way that she could communicate with us, speak. She never said a word, but she spoke. And she spoke very specifically. It, of course, took us 4 years to figure out what had happened in Lourdes. Each of us, Jerry and I, went into the water at separate times, and we both heard the same word. That was freaky enough as it is. We thought we were both having kind of a mental breakdown. Like, did you really hear that word? Because I heard this word, and that can't be the same word. And are we going to be those weird Catholic people where we talk about miracles that happen to us all the time? Like, we can't be those people. No offense if any of you are those people. I love you, but we didn't want to be those people. And he goes, well, I heard the word acceptance in a young woman's voice. You heard the word acceptance in a young woman's voice. We're in Lourdes where Our Lady appeared to St. Bernadette. I think it was a Blessed Mother. And I looked at him, I'm like, I'm good with that. You're good with that? He goes, yes, I'm good with that. And we went on with life. And one of the miracles that happened in Lourdes was Courtney was able to receive her first communion because of what she had done in the water, of how she spoke to us. We never saw that happening. That was a direct answer, we believe, to her brother's prayers. Because the next Sunday upon our return from Lourdes was First Communion Sunday in our parish. And Courtney was 7 years old. And had she been a typical child, she would have been receiving her first communion. And so Jonathan's response to the whole thing was, well, of course God did it. I asked him to. She received it first. He just wanted her to do something that everybody else was doing. And so he got his answer. We were still confused, but he got his answer. And it was 4 years of continuing to seek healing, continuing to live out loud at our parish, St. Mary of Sorrows here in Fairfax, where we found ourselves on November 1st, 2004, in Fairfax Hospital. Courtney was having brain surgery. She was having a VNS device implanted, and that is like a pacemaker for the brain. So it goes behind the breast, and then there's a wire that connects to the thalamus of the brain, and it sends off electrical impulses. So if she would have a seizure, you would swipe a magnet, this electrical impulse would go off, and it would calm the electricity of the brain. It was our last place. It was the last thing we could do. We had no more medication to try. We had nothing. And I remember being in that waiting room, reading some notes from a retreat I had been on, where it talked about what the Catholic Church teaches about healing. So we believe 3 ways. Miraculous healing, we all know what that is, right? Something's there, then something's not there. After you pray, an intercession has happened, healing has taken place. Healing after a time of suffering, you think of chemotherapy and cancer, right? Go through chemotherapy, suffer, healed. Or an acceptance, that healing would not happen this side of heaven. That would happen the moment she took her last breath and entered into our Lord's arms. And I read that 3 times. And I might possibly have said, oh, sugar, but no, I didn't say that. And I might possibly have gotten a little upset. And I might possibly have knocked my husband's coffee over trying to get his attention, which you never do to a Navy man. It's just bad. And he looked at me and he goes, why are you so agitated? And I said, well, figured it out. And I told him what I had been reading. And then I looked at him and I said, remember what Courtney did in the water? And he goes, yeah. And I said, who went in the water first? And he goes, Courtney did. And I said, whose voice did we hear? And he just looked at me and he goes, oh, Mary. And I said, we had 2 prayers for our daughter. One was when God brought her home, that she would not be alone. That was not that day. The other was that we would hear her real voice. Because she kind of sounded like Chewbacca from Star Wars. That wasn't her real voice, but that's what she sounded like. That we would hear and know it was her. It took us going to Lourdes, France, standing in the coldest water, naked, with a cold sheet around me to get that. God's a little drama queen himself. So, but we heard her voice. And that, my friends, changed the course of our life. And when I say, these other things change the course of our life, I mean that moment of understanding that this child knew where she was, she knew her purpose, she had spoken in the voice that God had given her. And it took her knucklehead parents 4 years to figure it out. We had no time to lose. And so when she came out of brain surgery, which we had her blessed, and the priest had prayed over her, because if she had a seizure on the table and the surgeon's hand moved, we would have had a child in a vegetative state. So we didn't know. We entrusted her to the Lord, and he brought her back to us. And I remember climbing into the bed in her recovery unit, and I was so excited because I wanted her to know that we knew. And I said, Court. And she opened her eyes and she looked toward me, and I said, guess what? Daddy and I figured it out. We figured it out. We know what happened in Lourdes. You were just trying to talk to us. You were just trying to talk to us. And she smiled and started laughing. And the nurse came running and she said, I've never seen anyone come out of anesthesia that fast. This is major brain surgery. And she snuggled into me and she didn't move. And I held her hand. And I said, you're there. I don't care what the doctors say. You are there. You are present. The dignity and value and worth of your life must be celebrated. And I don't care if I have to get a banner or a sign or those stupid balloon animals, but we're going to do it, and we're going to do it big. And we did. For the next 10 years, we lived boldly. We never treated her like she was a baby. We treated her like she was a teenager, and she was a spicy little number. She hated shoes. So we would go to Mass, and we were always sat over by the left door because she still had seizures. They still weren't controlled, even with the VNS device. And sometimes she would wiggle her foot out of the shoe. And then she liked to cross her legs in her wheelchair. And so when she did that, she would throw the shoe over and it would land on someone 3 pews behind us. And you would hear this little whoop. And she would be on the end. It would be myself, Jerry, and Jonathan. And the 3 of us would just go. And I'd look at him and he'd look at me, and Jonathan would be like, he'd lean all the way forward and he's like, who was it? Who did it hit? And I'm like, well, nobody's crying, so it's not a toddler. We're good. And Courtney would just go, and that's what her laugh sounded like. She's it was really deep. And I'm like, shh, you're not supposed to celebrate that you just hit somebody with your shoe. And she just laughed. And the most amazing thing happened when that happened. It happened a lot, but this particular time, pardon me, a gentleman came walking from the communion line. And so, there she is with one silver shoe and one barefoot. And he knelt down in front of her wheelchair. And he kissed her foot and put her shoe back on. And then got up and walked away. And there the three of us were, head bowed, weeping, so nobody would see. And Courtney just beaming. Her favorite part of the Mass was the epiclesis, when the bells would be rung for the first time. She would laugh if she wasn't asleep. If she was asleep, she was asleep. But if she was awake, she would hear the bells and she would start laughing and humming, and she would lean forward and she would kind of soothe and wash her hands. They called this a washing hand movement. And it was like she was saying to the rest of us, I know who's here. Like, I don't know if y'all see him, but I have no sin that blocks my vision. So he's right there. And y'all better get it together, because he's right there. He's coming. The King has entered the room. And because she had received her first communion in Lourdes, Courtney was able to receive communion at church every Sunday, as long as she was well, for the remainder of her life. And when the choir sang, Courtney sang louder. When the choir got quiet, Courtney kept singing. And it was one of the things after her death that people would tell us all the time, I miss her voice. I want her to hum again. But we lived in a way, we would go to a doctor's appointment and we kind of demanded that Courtney be seen. And what I mean by that is many doctors, when they walk into a room with a disabled child especially, is they immediately talk to the caregiver, right? They're not paying attention to the one that they're treating. And so I would get kind of feisty. My daughter comes by it honestly. I would get feisty and I would say, excuse me, when you enter the room, you are to speak to Courtney directly. Whether she chooses to acknowledge you or not, you are to say hello, and you are to say, it's good to see you, or whatever you want to say. And then when you're telling us about what you're going to do, you're going to tell her. And I'll listen, because I'm the caregiver, so I'll listen. And if the doctor refused to do that, then a week later, we had a new doctor. And so they learned quickly. And when we would go to Georgetown, where most of her care was for the last half of her life, they knew me on the floor. Oh, Mrs. Lenaburg's coming. She prefers the room at the end, next to the coffee machine. Thank you. I do. And Courtney, she'll change her bedding. They would inform the nurses, because I was still her caregiver. I was still her mother. I knew how she liked her bed. I knew how she liked her food. I knew how she liked one pair of socks over another. I knew what her favorite pajamas were. They didn't know her like I knew her. And so there would be a 5-minute dissertation on what we're going to do for Courtney. Y'all do the medical stuff. I got the rest. We're good. And so they learned to love us. And so they would greet us, sometimes in the emergency department, you'd have a nurse come down from the neurology department, and she'd be like, from the PICU, and be like, oh, Mary, so good to see you. Hey, Court, girl, what are you doing? You're messing things up here. This is not where you're supposed to be spending the weekend. You're supposed to be out and about. And they learned to talk to her. I think that was one of the greatest gifts that Courtney gave us to give the world. See her. She has worth. She has value. She has dignity. See her. Don't look at me. You're not treating me. I have a, margarita at home. You take care of her. We're good. Then we came to this place where nothing else could be done. In September of 2014, she had what we call rolling seizures. And that's a term we used. Basically, it meant seizure after seizure after seizure after seizure. They couldn't get them to stop. Like, she would stop for a few moments and then go right back into them. So we ended up in the emergency room in Georgetown. And I remember praying to the Lord, like, if this is it, Lord, if this is the moment, let me have no doubt. And we came to really appreciate the Divine Mercy Novena and St. Faustina, Jesus, I trust in you. We said that a lot. And that was Courtney's novena. Whenever any big decision had to be made, we did that novena. And by day 4, everything was shook loose and we knew what to do. We continued the other 3 days in Thanksgiving. But Jesus, I trust in you. And we ended up, it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had a resident. And I remember him coming down the hallway as Courtney has been given all the medication that she could have been given. If she was given any more, her blood pressure would have bottomed out and she would have had a cardiac arrest. And he had that look on his face. And he was a young guy. And I knew what was coming. And Jerry had gone home to get some sleep because we knew this was probably going to be kind of an ordeal. And that's what we did. We tag teamed. You know, I went to the hospital. Jerry hates hospitals, still hates hospitals, scares people with his Stalin-looking face, and the nurses were not his fans. But so we had a deal. He was home. I was in the hospital. And this young doctor walks toward me, and he's just shaking his head. And I took a deep breath, and I looked over, and over Courtney's bed was a crucifix, and I said, okay, Lord, okay, let's do this. And he stood in front of me, and he had tears in his eyes. And I said, this is your first time, isn't it? And he goes, how did you know? And I said, that's a DNR, isn't it? And he goes, there's nothing else we can do. I don't know what to do. I've called all my people. We've looked at her test result. Her liver is shutting down. Her kidneys are I don't know what to do. I thought, okay, this is going to suck for you, and it's going to really suck for me, but we're going to do this together. So legally, you got to do what you got to do. So you tell me what I need to do. And he was so confused. He goes, okay, well, it says here that I need to do this, this, and this. I said, all right. He goes, do you understand that? I said, yes, no heroic measures. If she goes into cardiac arrest, we let her go. He goes, okay. He says, it says I have to sign here and you have to sign here. And then I guess his, I don't know what's above a resident, whatever, the guy was coming in. He was called and he was on his way. And then he would oversee and make sure everybody was good and we all understood. And so he signed it and I signed it. And I took the biggest deep breath of my life and I said, okay, Lord, she's been yours for a really long time, but she's really yours now. You drive this bus. And so his supervisor came in and he was shocked at how calm I was. And he says, usually people are yelling at me at this point. And I said, what's there to yell at? I know. She's tired. Her body's tired. She's done such a great job. She has been God's ambassador for 22 years. It's okay. We're going to be okay. And he said, how do you want to do this? And I said, well, what's the protocol? And he goes, well, I'd like to keep her for another day, just kind of get her stable. And then I want you to be in charge, talk to the hospice nurses and get a hospice program set up and to bring her home. Well, Courtney wasn't your typical hospice patient. She didn't have cancer. She didn't have, things that you usually see in a hospice. And so we didn't know what to do. So we called this really cool guy with a beard. And we said, so John, you want to do this with us? That's pretty much what the conversation was. We don't know what to do. And we know you love God and we love God and we both love Courtney. And every hospice program I had talked to kept talking about pain regimens and morphine and she wasn't in pain. And I said, I want God to take her in his time. She still has work to do. Whether it's another week or another month, she still has work to do, but we can't do this by ourselves. And so he and Carolyn came over and they were so beautiful and so kind. He says Courtney was the face of Christ to him. He was Christ to us. He gave us the courage to do this because he was going to back us up. See, we weren't alone. God never sends you on that battlefield alone. He never sent the apostles out alone. He always sent them 2 by 2 or more. He never sends you out alone. And so John and 2 pediatric nurse friends of ours formed our little team, our little squad. And for the next 2.5 months, we loved her. We opened our doors. Perfect strangers. I had been on the internet since 2007 blogging. Perfect strangers showed up at our door to pray with her. I only asked that they pray in English so they knew they weren't praying any bad things. And I only speak English very badly, so, I just needed to make sure. But they just showed up. And we opened the door, which was very hard for Jerry, who was like, who are these people and why are they here? Why are they touching Courtney? Why are they praying over Courtney? Do we know them? Do we care about them? Why are they here? Why are they here? Can they go away now? And that's very much my husband. But I kept telling him, no, God said for them to come. So they're going to come. And Courtney would smile, and she loved to lean into you. That was kind of her handshake. She would lean over and put her head on your shoulder. And she did it for all of them. And people began to say goodbye to her. My mother-in-law, my father-in-law came from Oklahoma, spent 4 days with her, loving her, said goodbye to her. My family came. My mother had just retired. She came every day and did my laundry and cleaned my bathrooms so that I could just hold her. And then John told you about how people would show up and sing Christmas carols. Courtney loved music. So 2 weeks before her death, my Bible study of 20-something years came and serenaded her one last time. And then they lined up outside her bed, and they started giving her, work to do when she met Jesus. You take my son with you, you heal this, you intercede for us here. They were loading her up for heaven. And so for 2 hours, it was like a confession line. And then we kind of closed the doors. Those last 2 weeks were for us. They were some of the most beautiful memories I have. She laughed for the last time on Christmas Day. She laughed for an hour, just laughed, and we would continue. Jonathan would start doing his Grinch voice, and she'd laugh some more, and then things changed. And John came on the 26th, and he looked at me, and he said, okay, we're close now. And unbeknownst to me, he had told my mom where I was supposed to sit, because things were going to begin to happen to Courtney. And he didn't want my memory to be of those things. She told me that later, because I was like, why'd you move the chair? And she said, because John didn't want that to be our memory. And so on December 27th at 1:51 a.m., while in my arms, my second prayer was answered. And Courtney took her last breath. She simply exhaled with a smile on her face. And I know in that moment, the most difficult moment of my life, that she opened her eyes in heaven and she ran to her beloved. She ran. She booked it. And she leapt into his arms. And that embrace continues to this day. And I was fired from being her caregiver. And I had to find a new job, which is why I'm standing before you tonight. But I remember the call to John. And I said, Jerry made it, actually. And he showed up at the house. We hadn't called anybody else because he had told us, this is how this is going to work. And when Dr. John tells you something, you do as he tells you. And so we followed the instruction, and he walked in and he was beaming. And I thought, why are you smiling? And he goes, do you know what today is? And I'm like, Saturday. And he goes, it's December 27th. It's the feast of St. John the Beloved. It's my feast day. That's how much Courtney loved me. And I'm like, really? You're making this all about you? Like right now, this is all about you? And he just laughed. And he walked over to her bed and he kissed her. And he immediately started saying the rosary. He did all of his doctor things while he was saying the rosary. And he thanked her for being a suffering servant and for saving so many people who had never known who Christ was unless they had seen her face. Then chaos ensued, of course, as it does. But John was there and Courtney was home. And when the funeral home came to get her, I was taken back to the day of her birth because Courtney was 22 inches when she was born. And so Jerry had to help them pull down her legs to get a decent measurement. And that was the last thing he did for his daughter on the gurney, was he pulled down her legs so that they could cover her. And God gave me the grace in that moment to go back to the day of her birth, and the joy that I felt. It was full circle. And the EMTs that came, they kissed her. They asked her to pray for their wife who had just died of cancer. The police officers blessed her. I mean, that doesn't happen. They knew they were in the presence of a saint because her parents had been brave enough to let her live the life God intended for her. You see, Courtney had everything she needed to do the mission that God had sent her this earth to do. Her mission is as unique as your mission and mine, as unique as her fingerprint. And it didn't look anything like we thought it was going to look. It was bigger, bolder, more beautiful, more grand than we could ever imagine. My dad used to tell me, you only have to be brave one breath at a time. He taught me to be brave in the scared. My daughter showed me how to be brave in the scared. Dr. John and the work of Divine Mercy Care, they support and accompany Tepeyac OBGYN. So many stories when I was working the front desk there, so many stories, miracles would happen, sometimes 3 times a day. But that's what they do. They are the face of Christ to people who may never ever know him. They are brave in a very scary world that says life has no matter, life has no value, that a child like Courtney today would be euthanized, is being euthanized in our own United States of America. Thank you. I'm dripping. And so I'm here tonight to just encourage you to be brave in your own scared. Whatever that looks like, whatever God has for you, whatever it is, whatever that struggle it is, whatever that battle is, we all have one. To live boldly, to live bravely, and to know that you are never, ever alone and that God remains with you in all things. Courtney is with us tonight. She is here in this room. And she's so happy you came to hear her really long-winded mother, because Will's like pacing in the back right now because I'm sort of over my time, tell you that every single life matters. It does not matter what you can do. It matters who you are and whose you are. Courtney was the daughter of the Most High King, as am I, as are many of you. Some of you are sons of the Most High King, but we are all made in his image and likeness, and we all deserve to be loved and cared for. Amen? Amen.
Thank you very much, Mary. Mary's willing to take any questions if anyone has anything they'd like to.
You can be brave. This is your only shot. See, I told you you would cry. You didn't believe me. Yes.
Mary, you have a wonderful spirit that speaks through you. Did you always have it?
Was I always a big mouth, or did I always listen to God? I was always a big mouth. No, Courtney and Jonathan, we didn't really talk a lot about Jonathan tonight, but who she was to him and their relationship was a typical sibling relationship. And so through, Jonathan just made everything normal. Like, he brought us back to like this normal place. But it was really watching him grieve that I understood that the story was bigger than us. I think I always maybe sort of did, but he was the first one to say, Mom, you have to write. Are you writing this down, Mom? You should be writing this down. Jerry, the same. Both of those men in my life were always telling me to do that, because things would happen and there was just no explanation for it. It was miraculous things, you know. I remember our last meeting with our neurologist, Dr. Santos, and he said, you realize she's here because you loved her here. And I said, well, yes, but so did God. And she still had work to do. But yes, I've always been very comfortable under the lights talking to people. I never thought I'd really get an opportunity outside my own dreams, you know, to do that. But God does know the desires of our heart. Now, I am dyslexic, so writing the book was, you know, pure and torturous hellaciousness. But, you know, when you submit to the will of the Lord, he provides you a husband that says, just talk into the phone and I'll type it up. So I did. Anybody else? Yes.
Mary, when you got to the place of acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any advice for people who are either suffering themselves with a serious illness or disability or having a loved one that is, I guess just in general,
Mm-hmm.
getting to that place or helping people?
To get to the place of acceptance. First of all, to know that suffering happens to us all. So all of you will suffer. People you know and love will suffer. It's biblical. It's in Acts where he says you will undergo trials and tribulations before entering into the kingdom of heaven. So as a Christian, it's something that it's going to happen. How did I get to the point of acceptance? For me, it was when the pain of remaining in that moment was less or greater than actually the pain of stepping out. Like it was going to be painful no matter what I did, but I had to make a choice for life. And really, acceptance comes with hope. And so as a Christian, we are people of resurrection, right? So yes, we have Good Friday in order to get to Easter Sunday, but we have Good Friday to get to Easter Sunday. And if I say I'm a Christian, then I am to live as a Christian and live in hope. So how do you have hope when everything around you is falling apart? That's when you put yourself at the foot of the cross and know that he loved you enough to do that for you. And he's asking you to endure a season for something greater than yourself. And it's hard. You know, just because I accepted, nothing changed in my circumstance. Courtney still suffered. My marriage still went through a lot. I still had a lot of hard work to do. But my mindset changed, my heart changed, and I was willing to do the hard work because I understood that it was for something greater than myself. And I think what I would say to someone who is accompanying someone who's suffering is to be present to them. Suffering is very isolating. Illness is very isolating. Disabilities, they're isolating. Don't allow them to be isolated. Be their hope. Be their friend, be their face of Christ. Because when we lose hope, we have nothing to cling to. So be their hope. Be the person who sees them. The second half of Courtney's life was me screaming to the world for them to see her. Well, that's what a suffering person, that's what they want. It's the greatest desire of the human heart to be seen, known, and loved. So do that. We are the hands and feet of Christ. We, along with the great encourager of the Holy Spirit, we are here to do his work. And so we must do that. It is the Great Commission to go and love another as Christ loved ourselves. So go do it. Yes.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
In this day and age, when it's so beautifully pointed out, Mary, there are doctors who know their medicine but don't see their patients.
Yeah.
How often, or did you encounter, particularly because, forgive me, I have friends in the services,
Mhm,
service as
mhm.
well, in dealing with that particular area of care, did you find yourself running into physicians or doctors who told you to quit?
Oh yeah, sure.
How did you deal with it?
Got a new doctor. Well, no, there were some hard conversations. In the military system, you don't really have a choice of getting a new doctor, right? Okay, so we all know that. Hard conversations. You know, this is what she's entitled to as the law. I mean, I became, like, I hated school. Hated it. And yet, I probably, for a time, could have easily passed my nursing boards, maybe even certification of something, because of everything I needed to do to care for her. So it was a conversation. You always come with empathy and respect. That's how I enter every conversation. I do not know their life. I do not know what they have seen. I don't know how they have suffered. I don't know what has formed their medical opinion or their bedside manner. Number one, I don't know them. They don't know me. Number two, how do you get to know somebody? You enter into relationship. And so that's what I did. I built relationships. Her funeral was filled with people that traveled from the United States. It was a full church all around the US, former military doctors and nurses who knew that she had passed away, and they came to honor her. Now, she never spoke. Were they there for court? Yes. Were they there for us? Yes. Did it change how they practiced medicine? Yes. And that's why I work with the ethics committee at USIS, which is the military medical school. I go in, this year I won't be, I'll be traveling, but last year I was there, and you speak to the medical students in their first year in their ethics class. They have no idea. They have no idea. They're just medical students. During the last 48 hours in Georgetown Hospital, it's a teaching hospital, we were filled with medical students. The head of the pediatrics department came in and asked me, do I have your permission to send them to you because they need to see this? We don't have families like you. They need to see this. They know that she's going to die and how you are facing that death. Do we have your permission? I said, absolutely. I was never alone for 48 hours, neither was Courtney. 3 o'clock in the morning, a med student would come in and ask questions. And it was never medical questions. It was always, how did you stay married? How did you care for her? What is her brother like? And Jonathan came in at 2 a.m. and said, this is what I'm like, you know? I mean, he answered questions. We were a case study, and I'm okay with that. How else are they gonna know? We don't know them. We don't know their history. We don't know their trauma. You cannot make an assumption based on a 10-minute conversation with a physician under tremendous stress, trying to figure out the right thing to do for this mother and this daughter. You have to give them empathy and leeway. And so we did. You had a question? Anybody?
You're picking up on my spirit.
Well, I was just wondering, because were you always empathetic, or did
Yes.
that come after?
No, I was called a social worker. My mom called me the social worker in high school. Like, if your parents were getting divorced, or you were a rebel of any kind, you might possibly have been sort of maybe, I don't know, suspended for drug use. You ended up in my kitchen.
Anger and then empathy.
Yeah, no, I was angry as a little child. You know, I was very much, I've always been one to wear my heart on the outside. You don't want to play poker with me because I'll lose everything. I have no poker face. I guess I just learned by trying to be all the people I knew I wasn't. Like, I tried to be lots of different people growing up. And I finally, with Courtney, just came into who I was. And that's a pretty bawdy, brassy, bold, loud intercessor. I'm okay with that. God made me with a big personality. And that used to draw people when I was younger to me and to my home, where my mother would love them and be a mother to them. And I learned from her. I wasn't always comfortable with it, but Courtney changed everything for that. And now my door is always open, which still drives my husband crazy. Yes.
I loved how early on you said that you spoke life into Courtney,
Mhm.
especially at that moment when you realized catastrophic results for you both. Can you talk more about that? Because I hear that a lot recently about speaking life into, I work with children, so
Mhm.
young children or families and others, you know, you are strong, you
Mhm.
are this, you are that. And I was wondering if you could talk more about that.
Sure. I was taught by my Protestant sisters how to do that. Certainly not something I grew up with in an Irish, Catholic household. My father spoke discipline into us. So he loved us, but there were a lot of rules to follow. To speak life is to speak love, right? I believe that when we get to heaven, we're going to be asked one question. I'm sure there might be more, but I'm fairly certain this is going to be on the list. How did you love in my name? How did you love in my name? And that is a heck of a question to answer when I look back over my own life, because I haven't always loved in his name. But to speak life is to speak words that encourage. Our words can be like a knife and tear down. The wounds that exist from my childhood are all around words and things people said to me and assumptions they made about my life. The woundedness that exists in my marriage are words that my husband exchanged with each other. People who have been wound. People who have experienced rejection live out of fear of rejection. Anger comes from fear. So when we replace that fear with truth, and we replace that fear with hope, and we replace that fear with empathy and compassion, then Satan has nothing to stand on. And the wounds stop, and healing begins. So I watch my words. I don't say, I'm fat. Now, technically, I am fat. I don't know if you noticed that about me. Okay, but I don't use that word. I say, I am bold. I say, I am a cake pop, not an apple, because cake pops are tastier and prettier. I use words in my own description of myself, which I know to be true because it's a physiological fact, that evoke positivity. And so I do a lot of work with teenagers and middle school kids. And so you speak life into them. You are smart. You are capable. Yes, this is hard. But guess what? Everybody's got to do it. So you might as well figure out how. And we're going to be here to cheer you on. I had to do that with doctors. I had to do that with therapists. I had to do that with family members who didn't know how to be around Courtney. That is speaking life. It's what God asks us to do. It's how we're supposed to speak all the time. And when you do that, guess who's going to get upset? The one who doesn't speak life, the one who speaks lies. And that's where we get discouraged, because we start listening to the lies and not to the love. And we got to fight, because this is a war. And spoiler alert, God already won. So there you go.
Thank you, Mary. And that concludes our evening. Mary is in the back. She will sign the books that we have given to you. She's got books for sale back there. Buy one for a friend. We all know someone who could, in our extended family, in our neighborhood, in our circles of influence, could use this sort of courageous story to reflect on. So please go ahead and buy a book or two. All right. Thank you very much.
I or spoke badly of or mistreated in any way, shape, or form.